Hey there, Timothy Roberts here. Today I'm going to talk about the gram weight of your cymbals and just how important that actually is to the overall sound. So I just recently launched a new series that I call the Landmark series, and this is an homage to my favorite drummer, Brian Blade. It's named after my favorite album of his band, the Fellowship Band, by the same name. And these cymbals have been very inspiring to make, and in this batch I made two 24s, and when I went to weigh them, they both landed exactly on 2,850 grams. I did not do that intentionally. If you've ever tried to match weight to cymbals, it's very difficult, even with hi-hats, which are a lot smaller. And so it was kind of a fortuitous, happy little accident, and it was very interesting mainly because they both sound so different. For being the exact same gram weight and for having a relatively similar shape or profile, they sound wildly different. So let's talk a little bit about why that might be and get into the weeds with it. But first, let's listen to both of them back to back. So as you can tell, they both respond differently. They have a different pitch. They have a different wash characteristic. The stick definition is a lot different. Overall, they're both wildly different cymbals while being relatively very close in the specs that they have. There are a number of reasons why, but before I get into those, I just want to do a very broad, quick little overview of the different factors in a cymbal that you have to take into account when you're considering the sound that it has. We have a number of different characteristics, but to boil it down simply, we've got the size of the cymbal, the circumference of the cymbal. Smaller cymbals are higher pitched, bigger cymbals are lower pitched. Obviously, you guys know this. We also have the bell or the cup size, the shape of that. We have the profile, which is the curvature that it has. Is it very umbrella-like? Is it pretty flat? We have the weight of it and where that weight is distributed on the cymbal. So it might have a very uniform thickness all the way through and be a certain weight, or it might be really thick in the center and get tapered very extremely to the edge. Basically, weight is a factor, but you have to also take into account where is the weight distributed on a cymbal. We also have things like the type of lathing. We have the tension that it's under. Is it tense or is it loose and floppy? We also have the surface topography of the cymbal. Does it have very deep, heavy hammer marks and deep, sharp lathe grooves, or is it really smooth and uniform? All of these things I've just rattled off affect the cymbal sound in a massive way. So when we start to look at these two 24-inch rides in particular, what I found when I started to dive into why these were different, I looked back at my notes and saw the starting weights of each of these blanks. Typically, you want to give yourself room, so you want to start with a blank that's a lot heavier so that you have room to shave it down and get it to the target weight. And the first ride, that was the number one of the two, is one that started out heavier. It was over 3,500 grams when I got the blank and started hammering on it. And the number two one started out at a much lower weight. So it started out at about 3,100 grams. So I didn't have as much room to shave weight off and dial in the sound on number two as I did number one. What that basically resulted in was me paying more attention to the exact type of taper that I wanted on number one. So if you listen to this number one cymbal, you will hear a lot more life in the wash and the sustain that it has. It'll be a little bit more shimmery. It has a little bit more sustain and wash, whereas number 2 is a little bit thicker sounding and more articulate and pointed. And that's mainly because the cymbal doesn't have a very extreme taper. It's relatively the same weight all the way through. I do add a taper to all these cymbals. Most of my cymbals I add a taper to. And so it's a mild taper, but relatively not near as much as the first cymbal. So just there in the taper, we have a huge factor that's affecting the sound of both of these rides. Secondly, we have the lathing and hammering, layering process that I did, and the way that those vary. So on number 2, if you take a close look to the video, I don't know if it'll necessarily translate, but if you look really closely at the video, you'll see a lot of actual hammer marks on the surface of the metal. And that's, again, because I didn't have as much weight when I started out on the cymbal. I didn't have as much room to really shave it down after I had done the initial shaping, which typically shaves away a lot of those very present and distinct hammer marks and gives you more of the fully lathed look. So with that cymbal, I hammered it, got the shape, and I was trying to take away as little weight as possible. So I'm shaving over top of my hammer marks, but I'm not necessarily shaving them all the way down and smoothing them all the way out. So on the first cymbal, I was able to remove 400 grams before I even hit the weight that the second one started at. So we have a factor of the surface topography that is playing into the sound. Because the number 1 cymbal is a lot smoother in the lathing, and I was able to cut through a lot of my hammer grooves and get a really clean surface, that's also going to help with the sustain, the shimmer, the wash that it has. Whereas number 2, again, with that articulate kind of forward sound that it has on the stick and the wash being pretty separated, that's why you have a lot of hammering that I've shaved over, but I haven't completely gotten rid of it. So it's got a lot more topography. And then when the sound waves are propagating up and down the cymbal, they have more speed bumps to get over and around and through than the first cymbal. And so this can actually separate out a lot of your frequency zones so that you have a really clear stick that's high frequency, then you have a very clear low wash. It tends to kind of increase the high fidelity nature of your cymbal, whereas if you have something that's really smooth and clean shaven, so to speak, you blend those sonic zones together a little bit more, and you get a cymbal that feels like it's more there's more going on in the wash, the sustain, the stick, and they all feel like they're kind of melding and blending together. And lastly, we have the bell. So with the first cymbal, I was able to take away a good amount of weight from the bell, and I went in at the very end and did some pretty heavy hammering to the underside of the bell to break up how uniform it was, because it was a pressed bell, and to give it a little bit more smoky complexity. Whereas on the second cymbal, that bell had almost no weight removed from it. I basically just did a scratch pass with the lathe just to get rid of the oxide crust, and then beyond that I did a little bit of hammering, but for the most part that bell was kept relatively intact from when it was pressed. I didn't modify it near as much as I did the first one. So without getting too much more in the weeds, that's the general gist of why these two cymbals sound so different given they are the same weight. We've got a massive taper on one, whereas the other one has a very minimal taper. We've got the surface topography via the lathing. That's very different on both. And then we have the bell. Like I said, the weight is the same and the shape is relatively the same. So we've matched two factors, not intentionally, but we've matched two factors pretty well, but we still have such a huge difference. And this is why, to me, I love cymbal making, because you can't really boil it all down to one method, or you can't necessarily say anything without adding 50 caveats on top of it. And that just makes it fascinating to me. That's why I love this art form, and why I'm going to do it as long as I can swing a hammer and hold a cutting tool. So please let me know what you think. Which of these two did you like better? I have my personal opinion on that, but I'd love to know what you guys think. And ask me any questions. Feel free to reach out. And yeah, we'll keep this conversation going. Keep the cymbal nerdery alive. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.